Hi, fifth grade. This week we are starting environmental changes, which is all about when life gets complicated, as we often know. So, one thing that we know as people is that we like to eat. And boys and girls, not only do we like to eat, we need to eat. And to get the food that we have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we have to have areas that we can farm. And sometimes people cut down forest to have farmland or ranch land for cows to graze and eat grass. This no doubt changes the environment and it changes the ecosystem that was previously there. So, that is one way that we do have environmental changes. So let's take a look at what humans have done, boys and girls. On the left side of the screen, you do see a picture of an area with deforestation. This is where basically there was a forest, and people have kind of what we call clear cut the entire area. So you think about it, boys and girls, remember from our weathering, erosion, and deposition unit that plants have roots, and those roots hold down soil. And when you clear cut a whole entire forest area, you are eliminating what held onto the soil there. So if we think about it, boys and girls, the next time there's going to be a rainstorm or some kind of heavy rain, you're going to see a lot of runoff. And when you see that runoff, it's not just going to be clear water that just goes down from that area. It's going to be a mix of mud and all sorts of other sediment mixed in there. So you could, in fact, have mudslides that happen because of this deforestation and the cutting down of the trees in that area of the forest. When you take a look at the picture on the right, you will see that we're kind of talking about overfishing. And boys and girls, overfishing is exactly what it sounds like. It is where you have people that fish way beyond what nature can naturally bring those numbers back up through reproduction. And so, boys and girls, what we need to do is fish responsibly. One thing I like to do is go fishing. I've been sometimes out into the Gulf to go deep sea fishing for red snapper, which is a delicious fish. But there are rules and regulations that must be followed. I know in Florida when I went fishing and also in Alabama, I believe the limit was 2 red snapper per day per person. If you go above that, boys and girls, then that would lower the red snapper population, and then people would not be able to have a fish that they would like to catch. So, overfishing is a big problem. Down at the bottom, you see something that I know there were some Exploravision groups this year that were talking about cleaning the ocean, and you can kind of see the trash that can wash up on the ocean, boys and girls. You want to think about what is the impact on wildlife there. I mean, you have a natural area, a beach ecosystem, and then you have all that trash that does not belong there. So, other ways that humans have impacted the environment are oil spills. The picture on the top right, boys and girls, is from when back in 1989, when I was a kid, there was a huge accident off the coast of Alaska with a ship called the Exxon Valdez, and it spilled 257,000 barrels of oil into that area. And so you think about it, all the fish and the birds and the seals and things like that were all covered with oil. Fortunately, boys and girls, we saw a very good side of humanity when we saw people step up to clean the oil off of the affected wildlife. Unfortunately, there were many animals that did die from that accident that happened. But there were many animals' lives who were saved thanks to the helpers that helped out to clean the oil off of those animals. And actually, they used just a lot of Dawn, like the blue Dawn dish soap that you see at the grocery store that some of you have in your house. It actually works pretty well to get that oil off of those animals. So it's some pretty powerful soap. And when you take a look at the bottom picture, when you guys were really, really little, so I'm guessing probably just maybe a year old or something like that, there was a huge oil spill that was south of New Orleans in the Gulf. There was a oil rig that had an explosion, and it gushed out way more oil than the Exxon Valdez did in 1989. This one had almost 5 million barrels of oil that was spilled before they could cap the well. The difficulty with this was that the location of where it was spilling was actually underwater. And so this is like at the bottom of the ocean. So it was just gushing out oil from the bottom of the ocean. So it took a while. That's why there's so much more oil that was spilled there, was because you had to have workers or robots at least be able to go to the bottom of the ocean to cap that well to stop it from spilling out more and more oil. So yeah, it was a really difficult and unfortunate situation there. So this is another way that humans have impacted their environment, and this definitely would be a negative impact on the ocean ecosystems you see here. One way, boys and girls, that humans also have impacted the environment and changed ecosystems has been the introduction of non-native species. When we say native, native means what is, normally and always has something that has grown there, whether it's a plant or animal. When we say non-native, it's the opposite of that. So it's basically when you have something that was from somewhere else in the world that gets introduced into somewhere that it doesn't belong. Okay. And sometimes people have exotic pets, whether they're like a lion or a tiger or, any kind of pet like that. And it gets into an ecosystem where it is not from, and it can cause issues for animals that are native. Okay. One example would be way back when Australia was a British colony. There were people from England that brought rabbits to Australia, and rabbits were not native to Australia, boys and girls. And what happened is, um, they had more and more rabbits. The rabbits had babies and they multiplied. And in this ecosystem in Australia, they did not have a natural predator. And so they started chewing up and eating lots and lots of the grass. And so other animals that normally had the grass to eat then had less food to eat because of the rabbits everywhere. And so that is something, just one example of introducing non-native species. Another one is called, is called zebra mussels. And zebra mussels are they have nothing to do with a zebra and they have nothing to do with your muscles. Okay, so zebra referring to the stripes like a zebra, and these mussels are kind of a shellfish. They are in shells, kind of like clams, and so excuse me. And so, boys and girls, these kind of they kind of latch on to boats. And so we believe that that is a way that they kind of got over here from other parts of the world. But they really just kind of take over a lake or a body of water into where the native animals and plants have a really difficult time because the zebra mussels just rapidly multiply. So this is a sign that just talks about preventing the spread of zebra mussels, and you'll see similar signs like this at, I know for sure, at Texas state parks and any kind of lake area where there's like a boat dock. You'll see signs about making sure you wash down your boat and things like that because they really don't want zebra mussels spreading from one body of water to another body of water. So you also have some plants there. uh, Plants can come from different parts of the world, and then they get here, and they just grow so rapidly that they just kind of crowd out the areas for other plants to be able to grow. You think about it, if a plant comes in and grows really rapidly, it can get so big and grow so far that it takes up the sunlight for other plants that they could use for photosynthesis. So that's kind of the real problem with invasive plants, is because they get so big and they take up the sun, and then there's shade underneath those plants where you have your native plants that need to get that sunlight. So then they can't do photosynthesis, they can't make their own food, and then they die. And so that's kind of the problem. Another example would be, let's say that you get a turtle that's maybe native to Africa, and you're like, cool, I got a turtle, and this is a nice pet. And then you realize that it's really more than you can handle. And so you're like, well, I don't, I don't want to just have this turtle forever. So let me think about it. Let me see. I've seen turtles at East End Park. So why don't I just take that turtle to East End Park and let it go near the water, and it'll have a nice, happy life? Well, here's the problem, boys and girls. That turtle's from Africa, not from here. And it may not have any known predators in this area, and it may be able to really disrupt that local ecosystem that's going on. That's the problem when you take things from other parts of the world and bring them to different parts of the world, is that they may not have a known predator with the new environment, and it could really disrupt the balance that we have in the ecosystem. So let's talk about nuclear accidents. Next year in sixth grade, you're going to learn more about nuclear power and protons and neutrons and electrons and all sorts of things like this. Well, many of you may be familiar, some of you may not be familiar, but in 1986, in a country called Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union, you may know that now as Russia, okay, there was a nuclear power plant and there was an accident. The name of that nuclear power plant was Chernobyl. And basically, what happened is they were testing the reactor's safety, and some of the devices that kind of prevent an explosion got switched off somehow. There was a huge power surge, and they lost control, and then the reactor blew up with harmful radiation everywhere. Radiation is something that, in really high doses, it will cause cancer. And it can kill you rather quickly, or other things in its path in very high doses, definitely. You have to remember that people with cancer a lot of times take radiation to kill the cancer. So it's very powerful stuff. So boys and girls, what happened is in that area, people had to abandon it completely. You see a picture of an old swimming pool down there they just completely abandoned it. And it's just kind of decaying over the past 30 something years. And so, boys and girls, what happened is after the explosion, there was a huge cloud of all this radiation, and it blew north into other countries like Belarus and other countries around there. And there are actually areas where it's completely cordoned off to where you can't even go there because the radiation is so high. So it'll take like thousands of years before that radiation goes back down to nothing. So essentially, you have areas that are completely useless, and that people will never be able to go to for thousands of years because the radiation is so high. There are a few people that still live in those areas, but most people try to avoid it completely. And boys and girls, again, this is kind of a way that humans have impacted the environment. Another way, boys and girls, is burning fossil fuels. We spent a long time learning about oil, coal, and natural gas and how those can produce power for us, boys and girls. But when those fossil fuels are burned, they do release carbon dioxide and other gases that we call greenhouse gases. They basically kind of go in the atmosphere and they kind of trap the heat in our atmosphere and making temperatures rise more and more. And so it really affects us. If you think about it, if the temperature begins to rise, it can make ocean waters warmer. And when ocean waters get warmer, that means more hurricanes, more storms, things like that, and more powerful storms. And so, we've definitely felt the effects of that in the past few years. And so this is something that is a concern in how we're changing the environment. Now, this next slide is something that we're all a little bit familiar with, the coronavirus. Okay, everything's kind of been shut down. All the tourism has pretty much stopped. International flights have been not easy to get. You take a look at this picture here in the top right, you'll see Venice, Italy. And if you're not familiar with Venice, Venice is a city in Italy where instead of streets of concrete or pavement, it's actually streets of water. Okay, it's kind of built out in the ocean off the coast of Italy. And usually, boys and girls, the water is never ever clear like what you see in that picture, boys and girls. It's usually kind of murky and kind of dark. And so you can see when people stopped their activities, look how quickly nature recovered and kind of cleared up the water completely. If you take a look at the picture on the bottom left, you'll see that that is a map of China, and the yellow and dark red are areas with high levels of pollution and ozone. And so, boys and girls, that was before the lockdown for the coronavirus in China. And if you take a look at the picture on the right next door to it, boys and girls, you will see kind of the effects of how after the lockdown, the pollution went way, way down. And so, boys and girls, this kind of illustrates the impact that we have on nature, but also how quickly nature comes back when we stop. And so this kind of tells us that, maybe we can work on a more delicate balance. Obviously people have jobs and have livelihoods and things that we need to happen in order to survive. But boys and girls, perhaps we can find that delicate balance to where maybe it doesn't get quite as much as what you see on that map of China to the left, but people still are able to have livelihoods and things like that. So, boys and girls, you also have some ways that environments have been changed here that you see on the screen. Another example of deforestation, like tearing down trees to build a shopping center or a mall. On the right, you see a picture of the Hoover Dam. That is near the Arizona and Nevada state line. And boys and girls, basically what it is you have the Colorado River that was dammed up many, many decades ago in order to produce hydroelectric power for Las Vegas. That's where Las Vegas gets a large amount of its electricity from. So, boys and girls, you might say, well, that's great. Las Vegas is really fun, and I really like to visit there. Okay, well, here's the thing. The Colorado River has been dammed up. So, below this dam and on past it, the water is not near as much as what it used to be. So, you have a lot of issues later on down the Colorado River where it kind of has dried up a lot and not near as much flow as it used to be before the dam. And so that definitely has changed the ecosystem there. The bottom left picture there of the animal that is crossing the road, clearly there wasn't always a road there, boys and girls, and that has affected the ecosystem for the animal. As you know, anytime that you've been on the road, you may notice wildlife that are trying to cross the road, or that your parents have to hit the brakes so they don't hit an animal or something like that. These are kind of all ways that humans have impacted the ecosystem and the environment. But boys and girls, it's not always people that are causing these changes. You have a picture of a swarm of locusts that are basically taking every single leaf from these plants. And if you think about it, boys and girls, leaves are how photosynthesis occurs. It happens in the leaves. If you take away all of the leaves off of a plant, it will be very, very difficult for it to do photosynthesis and feed itself. And eventually that plant can die. So this is a big issue for these plants that are getting consumed by the locust for sure. So think about how that affects the food web in an ecosystem. If you remove that plant out of there, something normally eats that plant besides these locusts here. Okay. And so that would definitely affect that animal. And then think about the animals that might consume that herbivore. Okay. That's it's removing a food source for them as well, so it really can disrupt the whole ecosystem. And again, this is not something that was caused by humans. This is something that just occurred in nature here. Next up, we have a picture of a beaver dam. And so, boys and girls, these beavers have built a dam across a stream, and it's made like a small pond here. And this actually is going to attract more animals because you have more water available, and then you have fish and frogs and other aquatic animals that they're really going to flourish here because now that it's kind of made like a pond versus a stream that's constantly running through like a river. So, boys and girls, as I said right here, it seems so sad. Why do we have to learn about all this? Because we're talking about nuclear accidents or people releasing animals where they shouldn't be, or all sorts of other things, pollution in all of this, boys and girls. Well, here's the thing. When we learn about these changes, it helps us to be aware of what can happen by our actions. Just like you learn in reading class, boys and girls, cause and effect. Okay? It's a big deal in life. And so we always have to think, what could happen if I make this choice? And when we think ahead before we actually act, it helps us to make better choices. One day you will be an adult, boys and girls, and you will have to make some important decisions. And when we learn about these things that have happened, we can make the best decisions and be responsible people and help our environments. All right, boys and girls, thank you for joining me, and good luck on the questions below. Bye bye.